Sometimes when we're given the equation of a circle, it is not already given to us in standard form. When it's not in standard form, it's hard for us to tell where the center is or what the radius is, which is important if we need to graph it or do something else with that circle. So we're going to go over how to take an equation and put it into standard form. Right here we're given the equation x squared plus y squared plus 8x minus 6y equals 0. The way that you put it into standard form is by completing the square, something that we've done with parabolas before with working with one variable at a time. Now we're just going to complete the square with two different variables in the same equation. So let's write it so that we have our x and y variables paired up and spaced out nicely. So we have our x squared plus 8x together and our y squared minus 6y together. And on the other side we have our constants, which in this case is 0. So let's go ahead and figure out what we need to do to complete the square. The steps for doing this: 1, group the variables together. We already did that. 2, get the lead coefficient in front of your squared term to be 1. Well, that already came as 1, so we're in good shape again there. Next thing we had to do is add half b squared in the parentheses and offset that on either the other side of the equation or on the same side of the equation with a negative. So we'll do that. We have 8x here. Our b term is going to be 8. So let's take that 8 and divide it by 2, and that's going to give us 4. But it says we have to take half of b squared. So half of b is 4, half of b squared is going to be 4 squared, and we're going to add it to this side of the equation. But in order to make sure that we're balancing it so that we're not actually changing the equation, we have to add it to both sides. So in this case, 4 squared is 16, so we'll add it to both sides of the equation. Same thing over here with the y's. Y squared minus 6y. That negative 6 is going to be our b term. Half of that is negative 3. So let's take half of negative 3, and that's going to give half of negative 6 is negative 3, excuse me. Square that, and that's going to give us 3 squared, or a positive 9 on the right side of the equation. So again, we didn't actually change the equation, we just added terms to both sides. So let's go ahead and actually factor this down now. On the x's, we have an x plus 4, because we always take the lead coefficient plus or minus half of b. So in this case, since b is 8, half of b is 4, and we know that if we were to FOIL this out, we would end up with x squared plus 8x plus 4 squared, or 16. Same thing with the y's. We have y squared minus 6y plus 9. That's going to factor down to y minus 3, or y minus, or y plus half of b, which in this case is negative 3. Finally, on the other side, we just add up our terms. 16 plus 9 is 25. Once we have this information, we can figure out what our center is and our radius is. Because we said earlier that it's x minus our x-coordinate of our center. So it's going to be the opposite of this plus 4 as our x-coordinate, which means it's going to be negative 4. And our y-coordinate is going to be x minus 3, so it's just going to be positive 3, because it's the opposite of that term right there. Our radius is the square root of what's on the other side of the equal sign, because we know that r squared is on the right side of the equal sign. So in this case, that's the square root of 25, and that's going to be 5. We don't use the negative root because we're talking about a length. Radius being a length, we would just use the positive value. So let's do this one more time. X squared plus y squared plus 9x minus 8y plus 4 equals 0. We need to turn that into something that we can work with and go ahead and complete the square with. So we're going to start out by putting our x terms that we have right here, putting them together so that we have x squared plus 9x. We're going to do the same thing with the y terms. We have y squared minus 8y. I'm going to put those on next to each other. And then finally get our 4, we're going to put that on the other side of the equal sign. So we're going to subtract 4 from both sides so that it equals -4. Now we're going to complete the square. So we have the equation that we wrote out. We have to figure out what to add in this area. We always add half of b. So if b is 9, half of b is 9 halves. So in this case, add 9 halves squared. If we do that on one side, we always have to offset it and add 9 halves squared on the other side. 9 halves squared, we square the numerator, 81, square the denominator, 4, so it's 81 fourths. Let's move on to the y's. -8 is with the y to the first power, so that means it's our b term. Half of that is -4. Square it, -4 squared, 4 squared, which is the same thing. It's going to be 16. We add that to both sides of the equation to balance it. Finally, we need to simplify our right side and complete the square on the two sections on the left. Since our lead coefficient was 1, we are all good to go there. It's going to be x plus whatever our b term was, or half of our b term was, so that's going to be 9 halves, so x plus 9 halves. And if we FOILed this out, 9 plus 9 halves squared, we would end up with what we have here. Same thing over here. Y minus 8y plus 4 squared, or plus 16, we're going to factor down to y minus 4. All of that squared. On the right side, I would recommend you just take out your calculator for something like that. If you add it up, you're going to get 129 fourths. So now the step is figuring out what's our center and what's our radius. Our center, we always look at the opposite of what's in the parentheses of the x and opposite of the parentheses with the y. So let's go ahead and take the opposite of those two. Opposite of positive 9 halves is a negative 9 halves. Opposite of the -4 here is going to be a positive 4. So our center is negative 9 halves, positive 4. Our radius is the square root of what's on the right side. So if 129 fourths is r squared, and you take the square root of that, your calculator is going to tell you that it is the square root of 129 over 2. It could give you a decimal approximation. However, in most cases in this course, you're going to want to keep it under the radical as its simplest form that you can do without a decimal approximation. So square root of 129 over the square root of 4, square root of 129 over a whole number 2. Again, we only keep the positive root because it's a length.